Good morning, everybody. You are listening to Texans Against Foreign Intervention. Today is September 29th of 2025. I'm Dane Bennett, and this is the news. The first story we have today is by Dave DeCamp over at antiwar.com. The story is titled, Netanyahu Meets with Pro-Israel Influencers in New York, Describes Social Media as a Weapon for Israel. Right off the bat, it's just crazy how upfront they are with their intentions, the Israelis, referring to social media as a weapon. Just really not mincing any words at all. In the meeting, Netanyahu said the plan to put TikTok under the control of U.S. companies was very important for Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with pro-Israel influencers after his speech at the UN General Assembly in New York on Friday, his office said in a statement on Sunday. Netanyahu's office said that he spoke with influencers, quote, about the challenges in this new era and the public diplomacy efforts and the influence of the social networks on the discourse for and against Israel. Yeah, I mean, seeing the destruction that's happening in Gaza and actually seeing firsthand the state that the victims are left in definitely has an influence on people. I think it's called empathy. During the meeting, Netanyahu was asked what should be done about Israel potentially losing support from evangelical Christians in the U.S., and he pointed to social media, which he called a tool of battle, and cited a plan for TikTok to be put under the control of U.S. companies. That's interesting that he has a plan for TikTok to be placed under the control of the U.S., considering he's the Prime Minister of Israel. You would think that would be something for, our president to talk about, but I guess it's really not that big a deal to leave important U.S. policy decisions to old Bibi Netanyahu. We can trust him, right? I'm sure he has exclusively our best interests at heart. He goes on to say, what we have to do is secure that part of the base of our support in the United States that is being challenged systematically. How do we fight back? So I just want to point out really quickly, secure that part of the base of our support in the United States that is being challenged systematically. I mean, the support of Israel in the United States is being challenged by Americans. You know, it's Americans who are beginning to change their mind after they see the slaughter that's happening in Gaza. So, I mean, he's literally saying we have to keep Americans from changing their minds based on things that they're seeing with their own eyes. I don't know if maybe this is just me. Maybe I'm a little bit extra sensitive to this type of thing because I've been following this conflict for years now, but that just feels really insidious to me. I think if any other country said something along the lines of that about Americans, you know, if Poland, some high up politician in Poland said, we need to keep Americans from changing their mind, we need to control the opinions of Americans on this conflict, we would probably not take incredibly kindly to that. But let me finish reading the quote here. How do we fight back? Our influencers, I think you should also talk to them if you have the chance. And secondly, we're going to have to use the tools of battle. The weapons change over time. We have to fight with the weapons that apply to the battlefield on which we're engaged, and the most important ones are on social media. So you can tell that Netanyahu is becoming increasingly concerned about losing support, not just among young Americans, not just among Christian Americans, but across the board, the West is really wringing their hands. I mean, we're still financially and militarily supporting him in every way possible from a government standpoint, but I think he knows that in the West in general, the people are really getting uncomfortable, to say the least, with supporting this conflict up until this point, and there becomes more and more questions to why would we support this? Not only what do we get out of it, but how can it possibly be for the greater good if we have to see these results on TikTok and X every day. But for him to be, doing a photo op with influencers and trying to convince them to, I guess, do a better job of convincing young Americans to stay on board with this, it's definitely, that signals to me at least, that there's a lot of concern on his part about the war of information and the war of opinions on this one. The Israeli leader described the TikTok plan as the most important purchase that is going on. Under the plan approved by President Trump, one of the companies that will have major stake in TikTok and control the algorithm is Oracle, which is owned by Larry Ellison, an extremely pro-Israel billionaire and a major private donor to the Israeli military. Wow. I mean, that's certainly sounds like it would be ideal for Netanyahu. I can't imagine that if Larry Ellison is put in charge of the algorithm, I could see that being a situation where we're not even looking at direct bans like Facebook did back in the day during COVID. I could see it being kind of even more insidious than that, where you're allowed to post anti-Israel sentiment, or you're allowed to post, videos expressing how bad you feel for the Palestinians, but the algorithm just won't show it to anyone. So the idea that the algorithm would be controlled by a hyper-extreme Zionist who donates to the Israeli military is definitely concerning to me, especially because TikTok, much like Netanyahu is concerned about, he's right to be concerned. TikTok and Instagram and X and YouTube have been massive turning points for especially the younger people who are finding out about this conflict. So that's very concerning. Netanyahu goes on to say, "TikTok, TikTok, and I hope it goes through because it could be extremely consequential," Netanyahu said, adding that the other major social media platform he is concerned about is X, formerly Twitter. The Israeli leader described Elon Musk, the owner of X, as a friend. "We have to talk to Elon. He's not an enemy, he's a friend. You should talk to him. Now, if we can get those two things, we can get a lot. And I can go on about other things, but that's not the point right now. We have to fight the fight, give direction to the Jewish people, and give direction to our non-Jewish friends, or those who could be our friends," Netanyahu added. So he's just going to dictate giving direction to everybody, Jewish people, non-Jewish people. He's just got to give everybody their marching orders, and it's the influencer's job to get as many people as possible on board. I know we do a lot of doom and gloom on this show, but I gotta say, I do think that it's a good sign that he's concerned enough about this to be addressing it so directly. I think that really speaks to how much the sentiment has changed, and I think that's a good thing, because the less support that the American people have, or that the Western European people have, and I'm not talking about the politicians, but I'm talking about the actual population, the more pressure there is on politicians, the more people that there are asking, hey, why are you voting yes on this? Why are you supporting this? Is there somebody running against you in a midterm who isn't supporting this? That, not even that person necessarily is going to beat the incumbent, but it puts pressure on the incumbent to say, hey, I'm running a contentious election now, and I could be losing a lot of points for throwing my weight behind Israel. So this could definitely be a shifting point for the support that our politicians are throwing behind this. The next story is from the Libertarian Institute. It's by James Rushmore. It's titled, "Remembering Pope John Paul II's Crusade Against War." Last week, Pope Leo XIV renewed his calls for peace in the Gaza Strip, this time by commending the various Catholic organizations who registered their solidarity with the besieged population of the territory. Since assuming the papacy in April, Leo has consistently advocated for a permanent ceasefire, as well as the immediate return of hostages and the safe entry of humanitarian aid. Leo, to his great credit, has resisted the urge to view the bloodshed through a sectarian lens. Instead, he has approached the conflict in human terms, calling upon people of faith to reject the mass murder and forcible expulsion of civilians, as well as the use of collective punishment as an instrument of warfare. In many respects, Leo's comments on the Palestinian genocide are part of the same tradition as Pope John Paul II's opposition to the Iraq War. On January 13, 2003, the late pontiff delivered the following address to the Holy See's diplomatic corps. "No to war. War is not always inevitable. It is always a defeat for humanity. International law, honest dialogue, solidarity between states, the noble exercise of diplomacy. These are methods worthy of individuals and nations in resolving their differences. I say this as I think those who still place their trust in nuclear weapons and of the all too numerous conflicts which continue to hold hostage our brothers and sisters in humanity. At Christmas, Bethlehem reminded us of the unresolved crisis in the Middle East, where two people, Israeli and Palestinian, are called to live side by side, equally free and sovereign, in mutual respect. Without needing to repeat what I said to you last year on this occasion, I will simply add today, faced with the constant degeneration of the crisis in the Middle East, that the solution will never be imposed by recourse to terrorism or armed conflict, as if military victories could be the solution. And what are we to say of the threat of a war which could strike the people of Iraq, the land of the prophets? War is never just another means that one can choose to employ for settling differences between nations." Now, I just want to point out to Pope John Paul II's credit there, this was in 2003. I mean, in 2003, we were still deep in the height of, the post 9/11 propaganda. And, Americans across the board, the world across the board, I mean, it was really hard to be anti-war in those days after people were reeling from 9/11. There was a lust for revenge. There was a lust for getting back at the people who knocked down our towers. It was a really hard time for anyone to say even the most reasonable anti-war sentiment. And for this to come in 2003, it would have been relatively easy to give a speech like that by, 2015 when tensions had cooled a lot. But 2003, 2 years after 9/11, I mean, that was incredibly brave of the Pope to do. It definitely wouldn't have been an incredibly popular opinion at the time to say, no, we need to be diplomatic with Iraq after what's happened to us. And Pope John Paul II 100% followed his morals and didn't concern himself at all with how people were going to feel about it. And I think that's incredible. People really needed to hear more speeches like that at that time. Later that year, on March 19th, President George W. Bush announced the commencement of Operation Iraqi Freedom in the months leading up to the U.S. invasion. Majorities of Americans from across the political spectrum backed the war. According to a poll conducted by the Pew Research Center in February, 66% of Americans, including 52% of Democrats and 67% of Americans between 18 and 29, said they supported military action in Iraq to end Saddam Hussein's rule. Meanwhile, 57% of respondents, including 53% of Democrats, believed that the Iraqi dictator helped carry out September 11th terrorist attacks, and 61% believed that Iraq was trying to hide weapons of mass destruction. The calls for war were at a fever pitch, but John Paul saw through the fog. At a time when invasion seemed both logical and unavoidable, the Pope anticipated the deadly consequences of military action. The pontiff's formulation that war is not always inevitable offers a powerful rebuke to the faulty reasoning that foreign policy hawks employ whenever it comes time to justify their preferred policies, and his contention that it is always a defeat for humanity draws attention to the human toll such policies always exact. Yeah, once again, I can't drive home hard enough how unpopular of a sentiment that would have been in 2003. And in the years that followed after this speech was delivered, I mean, it's hard not to look back and say the quote, always a defeat for humanity, couldn't have ended up being any more true. The last story that we have today is from Dave DeCamp over at antiwar.com. The story is titled, Vance says Trump is considering supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. Tomahawks have a range of over 1,000 miles, which would put Moscow in range. Again, not to just beat the drum of doom here, but this is an incredibly concerning escalation. Vice President J.D. Vance said in an interview that aired Sunday that President Trump was considering the possibility of supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, a step that would mark a significant escalation of the proxy war as the missiles have a range of over 1,000 miles. Quote, you asked this question about Tomahawks. It's something the President is going to make the final determination on. What the President is going to do is what's in the best interest for the United States of America. I know we're having conversations this very minute about that issue, Vance said in an appearance on Fox News Sunday. How escalating Russia to a point where they feel even more backed into a corner and feel the need to be even more aggressive because we have Tomahawk missiles that could strike their capital is in the best interest of the United States is incomprehensible to me. The article goes on to read, it's unclear how Ukraine would use the Tomahawk missiles if they were supplied, as they are designed to be fired by U.S. Navy warships and submarines. I apologize, guys, before I even start. I'm going to butcher this name. Vadim Gibitsky. I might have gotten closer than I thought. The deputy head of Ukraine's military intelligence agency previously said that Ukraine lacks the naval infrastructure to use sea-launched Tomahawks. The U.S. could potentially provide Ukraine with its new ground-based Typhoon missile launcher, which can fire Tomahawks and was developed after the U.S. withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces INF Treaty in 2019. The INF prohibited land-based missile systems with a range between 310 and 3,400 miles. Which I just want to chime in here and say the withdrawal from the INF in and of itself was an escalation. We didn't have to do that, and we chose to. Or I should say President Trump chose to. Vance didn't address the risk of escalation that comes along with arming Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, which are nuclear capable. That's the part that we really need to talk about here, guys, is that this isn't just a standard missile system. It would be bad enough, the idea that we could strike Moscow, or I guess that Ukraine as a proxy could strike Moscow with missiles that we gave to them and gave them the infrastructure to actually launch. But it's the fact that they can be fitted with nuclear warheads. I mean, at this point, this is what we were so upset about during the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Is the idea that somebody could have a nuclear gun pointed at our head within range of us, and now we're essentially kicking around the idea of doing the same thing. We're saying, we'll possibly give you the delivery system for a nuclear arsenal, and you can place it right there on Russia's doorstep where you could hit Moscow. I mean, the idea that if we were at war with Mexico and Putin wanted to put nuclear-capable rockets and rocket launchers in Mexico City, that we would accept that and that we wouldn't look at that as an escalation is completely ridiculous. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. Moscow has previously made clear that the U.S.-backed missile strikes on its territory risk nuclear escalation, as it changed its nuclear doctrine to lower the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons after the Biden administration gave the green light for the Ukraine to fire U.S.-provided ATACMS missiles into Russia. When asked about his previous opposition to the U.S. arming Ukraine, the vice president pointed to the fact that the U.S. is now having European countries fund the weapon shipments. However, last month the administration announced a deal that will arm Ukraine with extended-range attack munition, ERAM, air-launched missiles, which can hit targets up to 280 miles away, that will be partially funded by U.S. military aid. So, Vance is trying to deflect and say, well, Europe is pitching in, they're doing their part too, this actually isn't going to cost us all that much, but that's only partially true. Just because Europeans are spending more on this war doesn't mean that we're necessarily spending less. And personally, as an America First guy, I don't really care how much this war is costing England. I care how much this war is costing the U.S. And if we're going to still continue to spend a ridiculous amount of money on it, it doesn't really make me feel any better that other people are throwing money into this pit as well. I'm not comforted by the idea that we're not the only ones burning money. The Europeans are burning money as well. I prefer that we don't burn any money. I think it would be nice if the Europeans don't burn any money, but again, those aren't my countries. The U.S. is my country, and I would prefer we don't burn another dime on this. Tomahawks would put Moscow in range of Ukrainian missile strikes, and Vance's comments came after Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky threatened that Kremlin officials could become targets if the war continues. They have to know where the bomb shelters are, Zelensky said in an interview with Axios. They need it. If they will not stop the war, they will need it in any case. I mean, he's always talking like a mobster with these threats. They're going to need the bomb shelters. That's like saying they better watch out before they have an accident. It's always a little bit grating to me to hear this guy talk like such a tough guy when he couldn't do a single thing that he was doing if he wasn't swiping European and American credit cards to the tunes of billions of dollars. It's like a kid with his gigantic friend behind his back saying, you don't want to mess with me. And it's like, I think you mean we don't want to mess with your friend. It's always a little bit grating to me hearing him throw these threats around, knowing damn well that it's us who's going to have to carry out these threats if he really gets himself into hot water. But that's just a pet peeve of mine. In the same interview, Zelensky said that he had the explicit backing of President Trump to hit Russian energy infrastructure and arms factories, and warned that if the U.S. provided additional long-range capabilities, quote, we will use it. Russia, which hasn't targeted Ukrainian leadership, has dismissed Zelensky's threat. Zelensky is trying to demonstrate to the Europeans, who now act as the breadwinners, that he is such a brave soldier, said Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. Meanwhile, the state of affairs at the front indicates the opposite. With every passing day, the situation for Ukraine is inexorably deteriorating. I mean, this is 100% true. It's been deteriorating for years now. This is like a country on life support being funded by the United States and Europe. There's been multiple times since this war began that we could have negotiated a deal to possibly give up a small amount of land and come to some type of a peace agreement, but instead it's like every time we would rather escalate. It's almost like, much like Netanyahu propping up Hamas with his whole we control the height of the flame idea to make sure that there's no moderates for him to negotiate with so that war is the only option. It feels the same way with Ukraine here. It feels like we have to keep escalating, to keep pushing Putin to a point where he's too defensive to negotiate with, so that then we can just say, aha, see, we can't negotiate with this guy. Look what he's doing, pinning all the blame on him when we're constantly pushing him further and further into a more desperate corner. And again, the idea of the nuclear arsenal being on Russia's doorstep is really, this does not bode well for the world across the board at this point. So that's going to be the news for today. We'll be back again on Wednesday with another show. If you guys haven't already, please like and subscribe. Once again, credit to the Libertarian Institute and to antiwar.com. I couldn't do this show without either of them. Go give Dave DeCamp a follow on X at DeCampDave. And until next time, God bless America. Peace.